It's really dark in here. You're probably wondering why I'm here. Graham was supposed to do this talk, but he couldn't make it because he had a loss in the family. So he's asked me to cover his talk for him, as it's one of the few talks he was going to give that I actually understand. So Graham was going to give this talk, but he can't make it, so I'm doing it. So you just have to suffer through me one more time. I'm a very poor replacement for Graham. He probably would have done a lot better job, so I'm going to be a Graham proxy. So this is Graham. If you've never met Graham, now you know what he looks like. He's a great guy. I was really upset that he couldn't come, but totally understand why he couldn't come. So yeah, I'm not Graham. My name's Mark. But if you want to see what Graham's up to, you can always check him out on Twitter. Check out his website. Graham's been on the core for about 2.5, 3 years, maybe 4 years now. 3 or 4 years now. He writes in all kinds of languages. If you go to his GitHub account, there's everything he writes in C#, .NET. He writes in Visual Basic. He writes stuff in R, JavaScript, PHP. He's a pretty talented guy. And he loves automation. And that's what this talk is about. So this talk is about automated deployment. So how are people deploying currently? Like, just someone yell out how they deploy their day job app. Do you deploy through, do you have to FTP up a tarball and unzip it? Or are you using like RPMs? Using git pull? That's pretty good. And how does the git pull get started? Do you have to SSH into a box and type git pull?
Yeah, you have to be in the office network and then SSH as well.
Yeah. Okay. And does anyone have to deploy more than one box? So like, yeah.
We do a heavy deployment with fired off an Ajax and there's a shell script that has a trusted key from SVN repo box to whatever place that you're trying to deploy to.
Okay. And so it's like some sort of a button someone can just go into and click on it? Cool. That's pretty good. So deployment is a whole bunch of activities around releasing a new piece of software. It's the whole entirety of it is taking an application live, whether you're deploying an update or dropping it in a new server. It usually means placing files on a server somewhere. If it's a PHP app, you're just dropping files in a directory, maybe restarting Apache, clearing APC, blowing up whatever cache you need to do. Those kinds of maintenance tasks, that's all deployment. And you want it to be secure, fast, and easy. And you want it to be as simple as possible. And you want it to be automated. The fewer steps that a piece of meat is involved, I like to say meat as in people. Meat makes mistakes. Robots don't make mistakes. And every time you introduce another meat point in your deployment chain, that's another point of failure. Because people make mistakes. So the fewer places that a person does anything, the fewer bad things that will happen whenever you try to deploy. And by automating the entire thing end to end, very few mistakes can happen because robots don't make mistakes, which is fantastic. So there's a few steps usually involved in deploying. You want to do a release. Some people make tags and then they deploy the tags. Some people just deploy right out of the master branch. Some people will create RPMs or packages or zip balls and they drop them somewhere else and then they get deployed from there. Some people check out from SVN. You want to install. So install would be, installing your application's dependencies. Run your composer, run your shell scripts that download all your para packages, download all your dependencies from wherever they are, put them wherever they need to be around your code. And get that going. Update is for after you've installed the application. You want to update. You've released a new version. You want to update to the newest revision. Rollback is a sometimes forgotten step until something catches on fire horrendously. And at that point, you have something on fire, and you want to go back to the previous version. Who has ever deployed a bad release? How much fun is that? Not fun. How do you, you're scrambling trying to get things fixed. It would be really awesome if your deployment tool also was able to go back to the good version. So you could just say, deployment script, go back, and it goes back to the safe version. Then you have time to figure out what went wrong, fix it, and then deploy the new version. If you don't have that automated step, you're in there madly hacking away, SSHing into the box, fix it, go to the next box, fix that one, go to the next one, fix that. And so it's this, Yeah, and the whole process is run by people, so it means it's full of mistakes. Bad. Automate that. Uninstall. So uninstall is one of the steps that Graham has that I always forget. Uninstall is when you want to take your application off of a server. Say you're using someone else's server, you set up the app on that server, it lives there for a little while, you're going to get a bigger, better server. You want to uninstall your application from that server. So delete your code, delete all your dependencies, delete all that stuff, and leave. Decommission is make sure all the private data that you left behind isn't there anymore. So one of the nice things is once you get this process going, setting up a new development environment isn't that bad. So if you say you catastrophically blow up your environment, you just delete it all, use the deployment script, deploy it onto your machine, and then you're set to go, ideally. So, release, completion of the development. Development's done. You want to do packaging, do any tagging, do any, like, some people have, they want to have version numbers. And so the version number only gets set up when you do a release. We do that for Cake. So we have a build script that runs a build, inserts a bunch of version numbers, creates a tar file, and pushes it up to our pair server. Cleanup is also doing things like cleaning out any cache files that might have gotten into the repository. If you're using a tool like Asset Compress, you're generating static files, putting those into the repo, checking them in, and maybe pushing them out. Install. This can also, some of these steps kind of blend together, and you have to really look at how your application works before you can figure out which pieces go into which steps. So it always changes based on every application. So install is almost always drop your files in the right place, make sure Apache or your web server is pointing at them, make sure your dependencies are in the right place, make the software generally available. But it might not be totally connected to the web server yet. It might be somewhere that the web server can get to. So upgrade. That's you're going to replace. This is now you've installed, your software's on this machine. Now you want to release a new version. So you're dropping in new code. You want to replace your dependencies, update all your dependencies. And then maybe if you're doing the way I like to do deployments, where you deploy into directories for each deployment, and then you have the web server pointing at a symlink, and you switch the symlink around, because then rollbacks are really easy, because you just point the symlink back, and you're already back. Yeah, and with that deployment strategy, that's the one we're going to be covering later on. You also have backups everywhere, so if you need to go roll back, the rollback is really fast, because you're just swapping a symlink back. Rollback. Also, upgrade can cover cover tasks like running database migrations, running any if you have a non-schema-oriented database, doing whatever MapReduce kind of data updates you need to do there. Rollback, bugs happen. People type out code and there are problems. If robots typed out code, there would be no problems, but there would be a lot less code. So you want to be able to detect errors. So one of the other key components with automated deployment is good monitoring, so that if someone does a deployment, you can find out, oh, that deployment didn't go so well, so you can roll back to the previous release. And that's going to show up later on when we talk about the tool that Graham uses. So uninstall, talked about this earlier. You want to remove all your code, remove your dependencies, leave that directory where your application goes, or the directories where it goes, empty, so that you can move that server. Yeah. So decommissioning, again, blow up everything, make sure there's nothing left of your application, make sure all your private keys, config data are all gone. Maybe you go and you drop the database. This one is probably the most often forgotten step. I don't think I've ever written one of these. I just go in by hand and do it. So that's another step that I've totally forgotten. I'm pretty certain I've forgotten stuff doing that. So automation, no humans allowed. If you find something you do more than once, if you type the same command more than once, you're going to make a mistake the third time you do it. Maybe not now, maybe not the third time, maybe it's the 10th time or the 15th time. So find a way to automate it. And then your scripting, when you automate those things, you put them into a script. And that script is also your documentation for how things get deployed. Most scripting languages include some way of including comments, so you can describe what the process is while you're including the process. Once you have a whole script done, hopefully it's really easy to run. Hopefully it's a simple command that allows you to focus on the deployment and making sure monitoring is happening. So when you do a deployment, you watch the monitoring, and you don't have to worry about the actual act of deploying. You don't have to worry about missing a step. You can focus on, higher level tasks like, did the response time suddenly shoot up? Did the response time go down like we hoped? is the database experience in higher than normal I/O load. So you know whether or not to roll back or whether to just, go have a coffee. It also allows faster deployments. When you can deploy faster, you can deploy more often. So instead of doing a deployment every 2 weeks or every month or every 3 months, you can do it every day, maybe multiple times per day, which means you can start delivering value to your customers or to your clients or whoever's using your software a lot faster, which is pretty useful. Most business people don't really get the idea of investing in all this scripting until you be like, well, we can give you new features every week, or we can deploy bug fixes every day. And then they're like, whoa, complaints go down because they're not having to deal with the same complaint again and again and again. So automation is key. But there's fear. Every time you automate something, there's often a fear of losing control, that if I let a machine do this, I'm going to lose my job because I've just replaced myself with a machine. That is a fear I've heard. Deployment is scary. When you deploy a new version, there's a very high risk because you could break it. The code changes you're deploying could break. The deployment script could be wrong. There could be a bug in the code because a human wrote it. Lots of things can go wrong. People can lose money. Some of us work on applications where real money and real data, like not real data, but like real money can be lost, like millions of dollars can be lost in certain application situations. So there is risk. So you have to fight through that fear. Yeah. One does not simply deploy to production. You have to remove fear. Yeah. You want your deployments to be simple and automated. Automation isn't good if there's too many options and it's too easy to make a mistake. So it has to be simple, it has to be reusable, and you have to be able to test it somewhere. So that means it can't only run in production. It has to be able to run somewhere else so you can make sure that it works, which is what we're going to do if the internet stays up. Ideally, everything is automatically deployed and everything is automated. No one gets involved, no one makes mistakes, no one gets hurt. That's the golden hope. Yeah. Deployment. I only have reviewed these slides a few times, so my timing is going to be way worse than Graham's. Yeah, deployments should be fast as you can make them, because then you can do as many of them as you can fit into the time frame. So this is a solution. What I'm going to be going over next is a solution that Graham has come up. We're using a little bit of Python, a tool called Fabric. Has anyone heard of Fabric before? Or have you heard of have you heard of tools like Rake or Make or Jake, or what's the other one? Capistrano is another one. These are all kind of like automated deployment tools and shell scripting tools. Make is obviously the oldest. It's from like the 1960s. Jake, Rake, and the other one, Jake, Rake, and yeah, I can't remember the other one. Those are all the Ruby and JavaScript versions of Make, so they're not always ideal for doing deployments, but they're good for like routine maintenance tasks. Fabric, however, is designed specifically for going into multiple machines and doing automated tasks on all of them. Same with Capistrano. So if you really hate Python and you prefer Ruby, I would suggest looking at Capistrano. So the idea here is that you do a commit. You can do one or many commits. And then when a merge happens to either your production branch or whatever your magic branch is called, or whatever your magic line in the source tree is, whenever that happens, some automated system can either watch that branch or so either an automated system can watch that branch and then automatically deploy it, which can be scary. So some people prefer the more safe version, whereas once it gets merged in, a human can step in, make sure everything's okay on the staging server or wherever it's being hosted, and then run a simple command, and then that pushes it out to production. So code and tools means demo time. So the tool we're going to be looking at is a deploy module that Graham has written. And what it is basically a very simple Python module that extends Fabric and lets you do a whole bunch of really nice things. I don't need to look at that. Okay. Which one is it? I'm just going to close these windows that don't have anything useful. Not this one, not this one. These ones. All right. So this is, does anyone play DayZ? Yeah, so there's a dayzmap.com. And Graham is the very nice host of that, and we're going to do a live deployment of it to his staging server right now. Not right now, but next. Okay, so this is the deployment script for daisymap.com. So you can see this is the host that it runs at. The environment file is the environment file close to this file, which is this fabric JSON file right here. Is this big enough for everybody? Can make it a little bit bigger. Right, so it goes into the environments, and what the environments file does is a configuration file that just declares information for each project. So the name is just a name. This one's called daisymap. It gives you the repository for where it is. The directory gets appended to the host name. So you'll see down here we have 2 site names, production and stage, and then site.dir is where the top of the directory is, the top of the deployment system is. And current.dir is where the current directory always lives. So that's the live deployment. So the other deployments get put beside it, and current.dir is the symlink that then gets swapped to the active deployment. So the way that this deployment script works is it uploads SSHs into the machine, clones the repository, does all the setup scripts, which in this application's case is just install a whole bunch of Git submodules, and then it runs a bunch of automated tasks for setting up assets and clearing the cache, setting up symlinks, moving the configuration files into the application, and then it swaps the symlink to current.dir. Config.dir is the directory that contains all of the configuration files for production, and then or staging. These are the configuration files that it's using. So what it's going to do is when the deployment happens, it's going to symlink all of these configuration files into the app config directory. These are the link. It's going to link the map directory into webroot image map because the maps are a separate asset. Copy task happens after the delete task, which is important. They're in the wrong order in the file, just so that I could make that point. That's what he said, at least. So what it's going to do is it's going to delete the app webroot index, and then it's going to move the base. There's like a standalone webroot dir with the extra index file. It's going to move that file into the deployed directory. And then the 2 branches we have, there's two sites. One is the production checkout, and one is the staging checkout. The production branch always clones the repo and then checks out the master branch. And that's the default site. The second site is the stage, which is going to check out the develop branch, and then it has a slightly different site directory because it's in stage.daisymap.com. And so how this works is the base config gets merged with the actual application's config. So if you name the environment as stage, it's going to merge base into stage, and then you'll end up with one config. So when you use Fabric, you have to, is anyone totally confused by how Python is working right now? So Python has imports, so you have to list out a module and then tell Python which functions, which symbols you want to load. So we're going to load env, run, local, task, settings, and sudo from Fabric. We're also going to import JSON, and then we're going to, from the deploy common, which is the GitHub repo I showed very briefly, this one, we're going to import everything. So there's a number of tasks here, a number of functions, and in Fabric you can decorate. This is a decorator in Python, so what it just says is this function, wrap it in this other type of function. And so this is just saying that this function is actually a task that you can run from the Fabric command line. And it's called deploy. The default argument is stage, and it's going to import some globals. It's going to call init environments. That's part of the deploy environment, deploy module. That's going to get you your environments. It's going to go through, find the environment that you're trying to deploy, which is going to be stage here. And then it's going to run clone, then it's going to run delete, then it's going to run config, then it's going to change the temp directory modules, then it's going to make some links, then it's going to do some copies, then it's going to change the current link, and then it's going to do services. So Fabric is pretty straightforward. You can call run, a function run, and what run does is it runs on the remote host. So whenever you run Fabric, it always logs into another machine and does something there. So run just lets you run shell scripts on other machines. And whoops, not sun. Format just formats strings, so it's very similar to the sprintf if you're not familiar with how Python works. And what copies does is it goes through all the items you want to copy and then does a regex on them and then copies them if they're a directory, or just copies them if they're an absolute path, or copies them if they're a relative path. And that's it. So basically all the code lives in the external module, and it's pretty reusable. So this is just a standard cake app that we're going to deploy. And you can see that there's basically very little code. So we're going to go over here. What do I have for time? 4:52. What we're going to do is we're just going to use Fabric, and we're just going to get a list of tasks we can run. So Fabric, I've installed Fabric system-wide on my computer. If you need to install Fabric, you can use easy install. So you can say easy install Fabric, and it will do it. On your machine, it will take a little bit more time because it's going to have to download it. But then you'll have Fabric, and you can say Fabric list. That'll tell you what you can do. You can do fab help, which will tell you all the bazillions of options that Fabric has. There are a lot. The most useful ones are the hosts and the usernames and passwords, which allow you to set up login information to log into another machine. So I think what we're going to do now is do a fab deploy. So we're going to go look at the DayZ website. Hopefully it... So you can see this is dayzmap.com. So it does work. Oh, we need to go to the stage one. Whoops. Not going to deploy to the real one. And we're going to go to the About page, I think. If I can get it to fit on this little tiny monitor. Oop, go away. So here's the About page. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little change in that file. It's going to go to View, Pages, About. We're going to go to the bottom, and we're going to just put paragraph, put some italic text, and say, hi, I got live deployed. Hopefully this doesn't blow up in my face. And we're going to commit that. Whoops. Yep. All right. So I just had to switch branches. That's what that was all about. So I'm just going to commit into develop. We're going to do live coding. And we're going to go back. And we're going to push that up to Graham's. Whoops. Cronk. Hopefully the Wi-Fi doesn't burn out. So now we can go back to GitHub. I'm not going to look at that one. I'm not going to do that. Go back. Okay, so I'm just going to assume that it's on GitHub. You guys will have to trust me. It looks like it went there. See? Computer says it went there. So now we're going to do fab deploy, and it's going to deploy to the stage server. So it's going to log into his machine, which is in Australia, so this might take a minute. And it's going to clone out the whole repo. So we're waiting for GitHub to talk to Australia. And you can see here that it's making a directory with a date timestamp. So that's where Fabric deploys into a date-timed. This Fabric script deploys into a specific directory. And then it's going to clone all the submodules. So now it's copying all the submodules into the staging server. In Australia. Oh, now it checked out the right thing. Oh, now what's it doing? Oh, checking out more things. Now it's linking the configuration files into the actual checkout, the clone that we just made. So you can see it linking the config files into the deployment config files. And now we can see that it's linked in it's copied in the index file, then it does some links. So this is actually where the deployment went live. What we did is we deployed into 212.092.1356, which is the date and the time that we deployed. And then what we do is we link that to current. And so what that does is the web server is pointed to current. And so what we can do is if we ever need to roll back, we can flip back really quick because we're just going to swap a symlink. So now it's all finished. So now if we go to daisymap.com, stage.daisymap.com, yeah, there it is on the internet. All right, but we want to roll back. I don't know if there's a rollback here. No, there isn't. Okay, so what we're going to do, apparently Graham either hid the rollback or I don't know where it is. So what I'm just going to do is just remove this. Oh noes. So now it's pushing. Sorry, I ran that one inside Vim. But you can see if I do it over here, it's just going to say everything's done. So, oh no, we screwed up. We weren't supposed to release that text. Now we're going to do a quick hotfix. So now we've done that. And now we're going to do fab deploy. For the sake of this demonstration, we skipped all the complicated update steps where it checks to see if it's already deployed and then doesn't deploy it. So what it does every time is whenever it does a deployment, it just checks out the whole site again from fresh. Obviously, you can make it a lot more smart and have it just clone the one time, see if there is a clone, and then do conditional logic based on that. But for this demo, we just kept things really simple. Oops. Where did All right, so right now you can still see it's still stuck on daisymap, still live deployed, still going. So we've made a very safe deployment system. It's 2 words. Basically, anyone could get into a box that has the right authentication and type 2 words. There's no real interactive steps for them to answer. There's no prompts for them to answer. There's no way for them to make a mistake. If they type deploy wrong, Fabric will just be like, I'm not going to do that. I don't know what that is. So they just have to be able to get onto a machine that's authorized to run this command. They can run fab deploy. About a minute later, we're all done. Can reload the page, and it's no longer live deployed. So that's an example of a way you can make a really, really easy to use deployment script that anybody can run. Any developer, it could be their first day, and they could handle a deployment because it's really that easy. Usually deployments are left for the most senior of developers, but now the senior developer can just keep writing code because the deployment script is just so straightforward that it's really hard to screw up. So if, I don't know if that goes too small, just so that there's no hidden magic anywhere, you can see that it's just doing basic shell scripts. So arun, I think is just, here it is. It just does SSH port forwarding. which is a pretty neat little trick. So what that does is that means you don't have to litter SSH keys all over the place, so that if your production server needs to SSH into another machine, you don't have to put your SSH key on the production server where someone else could get it. Instead, what it does is when it SSHs from my laptop to his remote server, it takes my SSH keys with me. And then those SSH keys become that remote server. The user on that remote server has my SSH keys, so then I can SSH into other machines and do work there. So that's a really good tip to do, is to make sure you use SSH agent forwarding, because it means you don't have to go and drop SSH keys all over every server you have. So if you have like 50 production servers, you don't have to copy and paste your SSH keys on every single server. You just want them in one place, so that if one of the SSH keys becomes compromised or lost, then you can destroy it really easily. So that's a really neat little trick he's got in here. So init environments just goes through, if they're not base, it just merges them in. Get environment just finds the environment in the list of environments. And open file just finds the name of this file and just opens the environment file beside it. So it takes the fab file and finds the fabfile.json. So there's actually not a lot of code in here, as you can probably tell. So it's fairly straightforward. There's not really a lot of reasons why anyone couldn't do this. It's just doing git clone, it's doing cd, git submodule update, and init recursive. It's all really straightforward stuff. I've set up automated deployment systems for like my own personal sites, just because SSHing into the machine and doing work got really tedious, and I got really lazy, and I just wanted to be like fab deploy. Ugh, done with that. And then I just watched the script go by, and I kept making mistakes too. The other neat thing with automated scripts is that if you are working on an application, say you have a staging server that's inside your company, what you can do is you can hook it up to other automated systems like Jenkins. So if you're using a continuous integration server like Jenkins, Jenkins will watch the repository, get any changes, run your tests, and then if the tests pass, what it can do is it can use the same deployment script to go into your staging server that's in your office or is behind firewalls and do a deployment there. So you can always be testing your deployment process so that it's never wrong. Which is a really nice advantage versus the manual process. Like if you have a manual process, you can't tell a machine to do it after another step, which is a really nice advantage to having like an automated process. So then you start going into a world where you don't have to maintain all these computers. You don't have to spend time making sure the staging server is up to date, making sure the deployment process goes well. It's always tested, because if you can't deploy to staging, then something's broken. So, if you have any questions about this, feel free to contact Graham. No, Graham's a really great guy, and he'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have about anything related to this. Yeah, so that's over. I think I went a little fast. Does anyone have any questions about any of this automated deployment stuff? I really love automated deployments. So, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, they do. Yep. Yeah, you definitely could. That isn't in the Fabric script, but what you could easily do is write something. So if we get into terminal, we can see that it deployed this directory here. So you could easily write a couple scripts, a couple commands in Fabric that could go into the box, give you a list of deployments, and show you which one is the active one. And then you could also figure out, like once you know the list of deployments, you could do fab deploy version equals, and then, so your command would look something like, this one isn't going to work, obviously, but you could do say I did one yesterday. So I could do that, and then that would roll back to the specific version. You could write a script intelligent enough to go into the server, say, oh, that deployment's already there. I'm just going to switch the symlink back. The version variable, you'd be able to write a script, you'd be able to write a command in Fabric that'd be able to go in and give you all the deployments. Actually, we can do that right now. Whoops. We'll go into fab file. Let's just do def list deployments. And we're going to do environment. We don't really need timestamp, do we? And we're going to do so if you don't give a version, it's going to throw an error. Oh no, we don't need a version here. I'm thinking of the next command, sorry. Okay, so now we're going to go into the box, and we're going to, actually we need to get the environment. There it is. What we're going to do is we're going to run ls just ls on the directory. And we're going to do format site dir. Okay, so that, other than it, sorry, I just have to fix Vim. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look for our new task, see if it's there. It's not, and the reason it's not is because we didn't put a task decorator on it. So once you use the task decorator once, you have to use it on all of your tasks in a Fabric file. Because otherwise it'll just go and be like, hey, every function in here must be a Fabric task. So it's really good to use the task decorator, because then that lets you make like helper functions. So now it should be there. So now we can do fab list deployments. It's probably not going to show us anything. There we go. So you can see there, you could obviously format that a little bit better, but we can see all the deployments that have been done. And where's one on August 29th? That was the time I did a test. So let's say we want to go back to the August 29th deployment. What we can do is we can write another Fabric task and just do, let's just call it def rollback. We're going to do the same type of thing. I'm just copying and pasting. Obviously, you can do this a little bit better. And how does he do that? So if we go into here, we can see where he sets up the current link. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this kind of basic idea and just go with that. Oops. So the link name is not going to be 01. So we're not going to take deployment current dir. We're going to take, oh no, we do want current dir. So one trick with Python, don't mix tabs and spaces in the same file. For reals. Python does not use curly braces, as you probably noticed. It uses white space for control structures. So if you mix tabs and spaces, Python treats one tab and one space as the same. So visually it looks like your code's doing one thing. Python will do something totally different. So either use all spaces or all tabs. I've mixed tabs and spaces here, so I'm just going to fix that. set it the wrong way. So if your editor is a little bit easier to use than Vim, you might have a slightly better time of this. There we go. So what this is going to do is it's going to make, we're going to get the deployment configuration again. We're going to find the link for the current link directory. We're going to see if that directory links. If it does, we're going to blow it up. And then we're going to link to, we're going to make a new link to the site dir, which is the site dir. And then we're going to find the old deployment. And then we're going to link to the new deployment. So what we're going to do is we're just going to replace timestir with version. If not, os.path that exists. OS site dir current dir. We just want to make sure that the new deployment exists. So if that path doesn't exist, we're just going to throw an exception. But it's not going to do that because we're not going to make that mistake. All right. I think this site dir version link name. Version link name. I'm just making sure everything's gonna actually kind of work. Okay. Yeah, we do need the task, that's right. Someone's paying attention. Alright, so now we're gonna do list deployments. Python's gonna get mad at me because we've mixed tabs. Someone saw that, didn't they? Damn it. Ah. Oh yeah, there's no throw in Python. It's raise. All right. So now we're going to get the list of deployments again. And then we're going to go back to the deployment we did on the 29th. So we're just going to grab that, and we're going to do rollback, and we're going to do version equals this. So hopefully this works. Wah, wah, wah. And now the fun begins. All right, so we're just gonna do, make sure to deploy. That looks like it should exist, shouldn't it? Yeah. os.path. That should exist. It's right there. Well, we'll do this instead. That was a little fast. That was really fast. Yes, it does. Oh yeah, a run. I don't know if a run returns. I think it just execs. But link name is on the remote server too. I wonder how he did that. All right. So if this was not high pressure live coding, it would work something like this. If you want, I can spend some more time after I'm off the podium and figure it out. But that's kind of how you would be able to do a rollback. Be able to find an old deployment and then create a link back to the old deployment. Does anyone else have a question That doesn't involve me frantically trying to code Python on someone else's server. Yeah, Endo?
Yes, so I'm looking the documentation.
Yep.
The Google, and then Google has the chapter of deployment now.
Yes.
But the document doesn't contain any automation stuff.
No.
So, yeah, I would like to add some more automation. But automation is usually or
Yeah.
Capistrano or anything like that.
Yeah, I find Capistrano, I find this a lot simpler than Capistrano, just because Capistrano comes really well, it comes with a lot of ideas about how you should deploy Rails apps, and you have to turn all that off, and then you can start doing your actual work. Yeah, if you want, definitely add a chapter on that. That'd be great. Please do. I'm sure Graham would love to have this published more. Yeah. Does anyone else have a question, or want to watch me suck at Python again? Yeah, go ahead. Yep. Yeah, definitely. What you would want to do is find out what those database changes are, and just like if you can ever figure out how to get into something on this silly system. So as long as your database changes can be done through something like a shell script, then you should be okay, because then you can put them into Fabric and they could be run anywhere. So what I've done in the past is we have named releases at work, and so you can run the migrations up to a specific release. And database changes are hard to roll back. That's the one thing. Yeah, database changes are incredibly hard to roll back. They can be, because sometimes database changes are destructive, like columns get deleted, columns get removed. So what I've done in the past is take a strategy with database migrations that make them a 3-stage system. So you have a pre-release migration. So what that is it's a migration that you can run prior to any release happening. So say you're going to release version XYZ. You have migrations that have to go out before XYZ, because version XYZ depends on 2 new columns in your users table, right? So you don't want to deploy that version without those columns, because then bad things are going to happen. So you run a pre-release to go in and add those columns, and since the old application version doesn't know about those columns, it shouldn't have any problems with those columns existing. So you can do that as a pre-release migration. You do the release, and then if you have any migrations that need to run right when you're releasing, you do those as like release migrations. And then what you can do is once you're sure that you don't need to do a rollback, you can run a post-release migration. And so a post-release migration would do things like drop columns, delete tables, so that if you do have a bad code deploy, that you can go back and switch to the old version, because the columns will still be there. Some companies some people I've talked to just don't ever drop columns. They just stay there forever. Yeah. So it depends on how you want to handle database migrations and schema changes. You're going to have to look at what your requirements are and what your tolerance is for stuff going haywire, because database migrations are hard. Yeah.
I tried to use this once, and I don't quite know the difference between run and a run.
Oh, a run is a thing that Graham has written that does SSH host forwarding.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in the Fabric file here. So he has a run as SSH port forwarding, SSH key for agent forwarding. So it's an agent run. That's what the a run stands for. Yeah. Is there any other questions? Automated deployments? All right. No? Okay. If you have any other questions and don't want to ask them now, you can ask. I'll try and figure out how to get that rollback thing working, and I can show you. It's just a little scary doing it in front of everyone and making lots of mistakes on someone's machine that I don't own. All right. Thank you very much. Hopefully I didn't do a too terrible of a job and you learned something.